Sweat burned in Adam's eyes. Then came the sound of bone cracking beneath a heavy fist. The impact echoed across the sterile training hall, and nobody moved. Nobody stepped in. They simply watched as the smallest cadet in the room was beaten down piece by piece. That was the rule here. Survival of the biggest. Until a pair of worn combat boots crossed the threshold. Adam hit the floor again. The impact drove every ounce of air from his lungs in a sharp, wet gasp. He rolled onto his side, clutching his ribs, tasting blood and old athletic tape. The synthetic mat beneath him was cold and slick with sweat and saliva. He tried to push himself up. His arms shook. His elbows gave out. And standing above him was Garrett. Garrett wasn't human. He was a heavy world conscript standing 7.5 feet tall, with a torso built like a concrete pillar. Thick gray dermal plating covered his shoulders and knuckles. His breathing was slow and rhythmic. He wasn't even tired. To Garrett, this wasn't a fight. It was demolition practice. "Get up, Adam," Garrett growled. The translator collar around his thick neck converted the guttural clicks of his native language into flat, localized English. "The timer is still running." Adam coughed, spitting a glob of red onto the gray mat. He was a communications technician. His job was calibrating orbital telemetry arrays, not trading punches inside the Coalition Vanguard's meat grinder. But the Coalition required hand-to-hand proficiency from every fleet member. It didn't matter if you weighed 140 pounds soaking wet. You fought until the instructor called time. At the edge of the sparring ring, Sergeant Clifford watched. He leaned against the steel railing with a thermos of black stimulant in one hand. He was older, terrestrial, scarred, and completely indifferent. His pale eyes followed the one-sided beating with all the enthusiasm of a man watching paint dry. He checked the chronometer on his data pad. Took another sip. And said nothing. 50 other cadets sat on the bleachers surrounding the pit. Humans. Heavy worlders. Some looked away, suddenly fascinated by the corrugated metal ceiling. Others, mostly Garrett's crew, leaned forward with predatory grins. Nobody spoke out of turn. The Vanguard Academy was designed to break the weak. The logic was simple. If you couldn't survive a sparring match, you wouldn't survive a boarding action on the rim. That was the excuse they sold. The truth was much simpler. Cruelty was entertaining. "Get up." Garrett closed the distance. He grabbed Adam by the collar of his fatigue shirt and hauled him upright. For a second, Adam's boots dangled above the mat. Then they touched down. He raised his hands. A pathetic, trembling guard. Garrett slapped Adam's left arm aside and drove a fist straight into his abdomen. The sound was a hollow thud. Like a hammer striking a melon. Adam folded in half. His eyes rolled backward. He didn't scream. There wasn't enough air left in his lungs. He simply collapsed into a heap of bruised flesh and torn fabric. "Sergeant," someone muttered from the bleachers. "He's out." Clifford didn't even look up from his data pad. "Timer says he has 40 seconds. He took another sip. "If he's breathing, he's sparring." Garrett cracked his knuckles. The sound was like rocks grinding together. He looked down at Adam, who was desperately trying to crawl toward the edge of the ring. His fingers slipped uselessly against the synthetic flooring. Garrett took one measured step forward. Then planted his heavy, plated boot directly onto the small of Adam's back. Adam went flat. A choked sob escaped his throat. "Pathetic," Garrett muttered. "You terrestrial runts bring nothing to the Vanguard but fragile bones." Clifford took another drink. 30 seconds, Cadet Garrett. Keep him engaged. The message was clear. Keep hitting him. Garrett reached down and wrapped one massive hand around the back of Adam's neck. He intended to drag him upright for another strike. But Adam was dead weight. His face was swollen and split. He wasn't resisting anymore. He wasn't even conscious in any meaningful sense. His primal brain had taken over, firing nothing but signals of panic and pain. It was Tuesday. Just another morning drill aboard an orbital station. Just another kid being pushed through the thresher because the instructors couldn't be bothered to intervene. Clifford shifted his weight. His fingers tapped impatiently against the thermos. He was waiting for the clock to run out so he could go to lunch. Then the main bulkhead doors opened. The pneumatic hiss of the heavy gym doors cut through the constant hum of the ventilation system. Major Rebecca Shaw walked into the room. She wasn't particularly tall. She wore standard-issue gray fatigues, faded at the knees and elbows. A titanium brace ran along her left forearm. A quiet souvenir from the siege of Tartarus. She didn't march. She didn't stomp. She simply walked. Heel to toe. Measured. Deliberate. Each step carried her across the metal floor grates. And slowly, the noise in the gym began to die. It didn't happen all at once. It moved through the room like a cold front. First, the cadets nearest the door went completely still. Their backs straightened. Their posture snapped rigid. Then the silence spread through the bleachers. Even the heavy-worlders, the massive brawlers who normally laughed at terrestrial officers, closed their mouths and lowered their eyes. Shaw reached the edge of the sparring ring. She didn't look at the crowd. She didn't look at Clifford. Her pale eyes locked onto Garrett. Cold as cracked ice. Garrett had Adam half lifted from the mat. His fist was already pulled back, ready to crush the boy's ribs. Then Garrett froze. The heavy worlder brain was wired around dominance. Threats were measured by mass. Armor. Aggression. By every physical measurement, the human woman standing 20 feet away was insignificant. She didn't even have her sidearm. But biology is older than measurements. Garrett's sensory pits flared. His breathing hitched. A violent spike of adrenaline flooded his system. But it wasn't the adrenaline of a hunter. It was the chemical panic of prey. Shaw stopped at the edge of the mat. She didn't shout. She didn't bark an order. Her voice was quiet. Yet it carried effortlessly through the absolute silence. Drop him. Garrett's fist trembled. He looked at Shaw. Then at the broken boy in his grip. Then back at Shaw. His jaw worked. He tried to speak. Tried to reclaim the dominance he'd possessed only seconds earlier. But he couldn't move. He was 800 pounds of muscle and dermal plating. She was a ghost in faded cotton. And he couldn't bring his arm forward. Shaw stared at him. There was no anger on her face. Anger meant loss of control. Anger meant a fight. What Shaw projected was something far more terrifying. Absolute certainty. It was the 1,000-year stare of a predator from a Class 9 death world. A predator that had seen the worst the galaxy could offer, and buried it. She didn't look at Garrett like he was a cadet. She didn't look at him like he was a soldier. She looked at him like he was an obstacle. And she was calculating exactly how much effort it would take to remove him. Major Shaw, Clifford said. His voice sounded thinner than he intended. He pushed himself away from the railing, desperately trying to recover some authority in front of his class. This is a sanctioned bout. The timer hasn't. Shaw slowly turned her head. Clifford stopped talking. He swallowed. Suddenly, the thermos in his hand felt very heavy. Sergeant Clifford, Shaw said. Her tone was conversational. Which somehow made it worse. Is the objective of this drill to evaluate combat readiness? Yes, ma'am. Clifford forced the words out. Endurance under pressure. I see. Shaw turned her attention back toward the center of the ring. And how much pressure is required to evaluate a communications technician who has been unconscious for the last 2 minutes? Clifford stiffened. Are we testing his ability to bleed on the mats? The rules state, the rules. Shaw interrupted him. Her voice dropped by barely a fraction. Instructors are required to maintain the operational viability of their cadets. She stepped forward. You aren't training him, Clifford. Her eyes hardened. You're letting him be used as a heavy bag because you're too lazy to structure a proper sparring matrix. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The contempt in those words stripped the room bare. Shaw stepped over the boundary line and walked onto the mat. Garrett's muscles locked. As she approached him, the sheer evolutionary weight of humanity seemed to bear down on his nervous system. Humans were endurance hunters. They didn't have claws. They didn't have armor. They didn't have the raw strength of a heavy worlder. They had something else. They pursued. Relentlessly. They chased prey until it couldn't run anymore. Until it collapsed. Until it died. Garrett felt that history radiating from the woman walking toward him. Shaw stopped 2 feet away. She looked up. Direct eye contact. Let go of his shirt. Garrett opened his hand. Adam crumpled onto the mat. He lay motionless except for the ragged, bubbling rise and fall of his chest. Garrett took 1 slow step backward. His eyes never left Shaw. He was terrified to look away. Terrified to turn his back. He bumped into the ropes and stopped. Breathing heavily. Completely subdued. And Shaw hadn't thrown a single punch. She knelt beside Adam. Checked his pulse. Her fingers rested lightly against his bruised neck. Harrison. David. 2 terrestrial cadets scrambled down from the top row of the bleachers, nearly falling over themselves in their hurry. Get a medical stretcher down here. Shaw's voice was sharp now. Right now. Yes, Major. David sprinted toward the emergency lockers beside the bulkhead. Shaw stood. She wiped a smear of Adam's blood from her fingertips onto her fatigue pants. Then she looked across the ring. Clifford was standing perfectly at attention. His thermos had been forgotten. Sergeant. Yes, ma'am. This session is over. Yes, ma'am. Shaw paused. And Sergeant? Ma'am. Her eyes narrowed into slits of cold iron. If I ever walk into a training hall and see you delegating your command responsibilities to a heavy worlder's ego again. She let the silence hang. I will personally strip your rank, throw you into this ring, and see exactly how well you manage your timer. She tilted her head. Do we understand each other? Clifford went pale. Crystal clear, Major. Shaw turned back toward the room. 50 cadets sat in absolute silence. She didn't give them a speech. She didn't offer comfort. She didn't scold them. She simply stood there. A solitary anchor of quiet, devastating authority. And waited for the medics. The bullies had owned that room for an hour. She had taken it from them with a single look. The med bay smelled of ozone, synthetic iodine, and the stale sweat of a dozen different species. Adam woke with a dull, throbbing ache radiating through his chest. The ceiling above him was a sterile expanse of white LED panels, humming at a frequency he could feel in his teeth. He tried to move. Fire lanced through his ribs. He sucked in a sharp breath. Don't move, kid. A medical technician named Bennett appeared in his peripheral vision, tapping a stylus against a diagnostic tablet. He didn't look up. 3 cracked ribs. Mild internal bleeding, contained by the autodoc. Concussion that would have scrambled a lesser primate. He finally glanced at Adam. You'll live. A pause. But you're benched for a week. Adam swallowed. His throat felt like sandpaper. Timer. He could barely speak. Did the timer run out? Bennett stopped. Then lowered the tablet. He looked at Adam with a mixture of pity and exhaustion. Major Shaw stopped the clock. A beat. You're clear. Adam closed his eyes. The memory of the gym came rushing back in fractured bursts. Garrett's fists. The cold mat. The laughter. The absolute certainty that nobody was going to stop the beating. A hot, humiliating sting burned behind his eyelids. He squeezed them shut. Don't wallow, Adam. The voice came from the foot of the bed. Calm. Cold. Completely without sympathy. But also without malice. Adam opened his eyes. Major Shaw stood there. Her arms were crossed over her chest. The titanium brace on her left arm caught the harsh overhead light. Bennett quickly excused himself, slipping behind the privacy curtain with a quiet apology. Shaw stepped closer. She didn't look at the monitors. She looked directly at Adam's bruised, swollen face. You did the math wrong today, cadet. Adam tried to push himself onto his elbows. He made it 2 inches before the pain forced him back down. Ma'am. I couldn't move him. His voice cracked. He weighs 6 times what I do. I am aware of Garrett's mass. Shaw's tone didn't change. He's a Valyrian. Their homeworld's gravity is 3 times ours. Their bone density is roughly equivalent to poured concrete. She leaned closer. So why, in the name of the coalition, were you trying to engage him using a standard terrestrial boxing stance? Adam blinked. Sergeant Clifford said standard engagement rules applied. I had to hold the center ring. Shaw exhaled slowly. It was the sound of a woman who had spent a lifetime watching people die for stupid reasons. Clifford is an idiot. She said it flatly. He thinks the Vanguard is about turning every species into the exact same kind of hammer. She tapped her temple. But you aren't a hammer, Adam. She looked directly into his eyes. You're a scalpel trying to chop wood. She moved to the side of the bed and leaned against the metal railing. Heavyworlders fight for dominance. It's biological. They lock horns. They trade blows. Whoever remains standing takes the territory. She paused. That's how their brains process conflict. Her finger tapped against her temple again. Clifford allowed Garrett to force you into that paradigm. Then her eyes hardened. But humans don't fight for dominance, Adam. We fight for survival. She leaned closer. We're endurance hunters. We're engineers. We survive by changing the parameters of the environment until the environment kills the other guy for us. Adam listened. For a moment, he forgot about the pain. You calibrate orbital telemetry, Shaw continued. You track microdebris fields traveling at relativistic speeds. You chart safe vectors for battleships. She pointed toward him. You understand geometry, momentum, and predictive pathing better than anyone in that gym. Shaw leaned down until her face was closer to his. Her pale eyes were intense. Not like the Heavyworlders. Something colder. Something more dangerous. Next week, you go back into that ring. Adam stared at her. But you don't fight Garrett's war. She straightened. You fight yours. If he swings, you aren't there. If he charges, you let his own mass carry him into the boundary cables. You don't need to knock him out to win. She paused. You just need to outlast his cardio. A Valyrian burns 4,000 calories an hour simply existing in standard gravity. Her voice remained calm. By minute 3, his lungs will be screaming for oxygen. Make him work for every inch of that mat. Adam swallowed. And if he catches me again? Shaw stood. Her expression hardened into a mask of cold resolve. Then you make it hurt. She pointed toward his chest. Joints. Sensor pits. Soft tissue behind the knees. You are terrestrial. She looked at him one last time. We don't have armor. A beat. We have malice. Stop fighting fair. She turned toward the exit. Just before disappearing behind the privacy curtain, she stopped. I didn't step in today to save you, cadet. She didn't look back. I stepped in because watching an asset misuse its own capabilities offends me. A final pause. Don't make me watch it again. The curtain slid shut. Adam was alone. The steady rhythmic beeping of the autodock filled the room. His chest still hurt. His ribs still felt like broken glass. But beneath the pain, buried somewhere under the bruised muscle and cracked bone, something else had begun to grow. Something cold. Something rational. Something dangerous. 8 days later, the training hall was quieter than usual. Major Shaw had only walked through those bulkhead doors once. That had been enough. The entire ecosystem of the room had changed. The casual cruelty that normally infected the sparring sessions was gone. In its place was something far more uncomfortable. Professionalism. Sergeant Clifford stood beside the equipment lockers. He wasn't drinking from his thermos. He held a data pad rigidly in both hands, his posture stiff, his eyes fixed on the floor grates. Major Shaw sat in the center of the bleachers. Her boots were propped on the row in front of her while she read a tactical manifest. She looked completely relaxed. Which somehow made everyone else sweat harder. Next rotation. Clifford barked. But his voice no longer carried its old edge. Cadet Garrett. A pause. Cadet Adam. A low murmur moved through the bleachers. Several heads turned toward the locker room entrance. Adam walked out. He didn't look the same. The swelling on his face had gone down, leaving ugly yellow and purple bruises across his cheekbones and jaw. His left side was wrapped tightly to support his healing ribs. He looked fragile. He looked like meat being sent back into the grinder. But as he stepped toward the mat, something about his eyes was different. The panic was gone. In its place was a quiet, calculating stillness. Garrett stepped through the ropes on the opposite side. The massive heavy welder cracked his neck. The dermal plating across his shoulders shifted like tectonic plates. He looked across the ring at Adam. Then glanced nervously toward the bleachers. Toward Shaw. She didn't even look up from her data pad. Standard rules, Clifford announced. He sounded like a man reading from a hostage script. 3 minutes. Submissions allowed. No strikes to the back of the head. Adam stepped toward the center. Garrett loomed over him. A mountain of gray muscle and hostility. You should have stayed in the medbay, terrestrial. Garrett's translator rendered the low vibration of his voice into English. I'll snap you in half. Adam didn't answer. Instead, he changed his stance. He didn't raise his hands into the standard Vanguard boxing guard. His arms stayed loose. His knees bent deeply. His center of gravity dropped. He turned his body at an angle, presenting the smallest possible target. Clifford looked at the timer. Begin. Garrett lunged. He didn't bother with a jab. He went straight for a crushing sweeping hook designed to catch Adam in the ribs and launch him across the room. Adam wasn't there. He didn't block. He didn't absorb the blow. The instant Garrett's massive shoulder twitched, Adam dropped his weight and slipped underneath the tree trunk arm. The punch sailed wide. Garrett's own momentum pulled him forward. Adam pivoted on his heel. Then tapped the back of Garrett's knee with the side of his boot. It wasn't a hard kick. It was barely a nudge. But it landed at exactly the right point in the movement of 800 pounds of forward momentum. Garrett stumbled. His heavy boot caught the synthetic mat. He crashed into the boundary ropes. Steel cables groaned beneath his weight. Silence fell across the bleachers. Garrett roared and shoved himself away from the ropes. He spun around. His sensory pits flared wide. Searching. Adam was already standing 10 feet away. Dead center. Breathing slowly. Steadily. Stand still. Garrett bellowed. He charged again. 2 massive strides. Then both hands came down in a hammer blow. Adam stepped off the center line. Garrett's fist slammed into the mat. The impact sent a shockwave through the floor. Before the heavy worlder could recover, Adam stepped inside. He didn't strike the armor. He drove the heel of his palm upward. Straight into the soft tissue beneath Garrett's translator collar. The heavy worlder's equivalent of an Adam's apple. Garrett choked. A wet, hacking sound tore from his throat. He staggered backward, swatting blindly at the air. Adam immediately retreated. Keeping his distance. 1 minute. Garrett was already breathing hard. Moving 800 pounds of mass that quickly in standard gravity was a thermodynamic nightmare. Sweat gathered in the deep creases of his gray skin. He glared at Adam. The arrogance was gone. Replaced by frustration. Then fury. He lunged again. This time, he abandoned technique completely. Raw speed. He caught Adam's shoulder. Massive fingers closed around the fabric of his fatigue shirt. Adam grimaced as the grip sent a bolt of pain through his injured ribs. Garrett yanked him forward. His other fist pulled back. Ready to finish it. Adam didn't fight the pull. He used it. He stepped forward with the momentum. Then drove his forehead directly into Garrett's nose. Bone cracked. Dark fluid erupted from Garrett's nostrils. The heavy welder roared and released Adam, clutching his face. Adam hit the mat. Rolled. And sprang back to his feet. Blood ran down his own forehead from the impact. It stung his eyes. He ignored it. His attention stayed locked on Garrett's chest. Watching. Counting. The rapid rise and fall of the Valyrian's breathing. 2 minutes. Garrett was falling apart. His nose was broken. Dark fluid ran down his chin. His chest heaved like a bellows. He tried to step forward. His legs were sluggish. Trembling. Every movement was costing him more energy. He swung a lazy backhand. Adam ducked underneath it. Then shoved Garrett's hip. The heavy welder was already off balance. His own feet betrayed him. He stumbled. Tripped. And crashed to the mat. The impact rattled the floor. Garrett tried to push himself up. His massive arms shook. He managed to reach one knee. Gasping for air. Thick strands of saliva hung from his mouth. He looked up. Adam stood over him. The human was battered. His face was bleeding. His posture still favored his broken ribs. But he wasn't broken. He was breathing steadily. His eyes were cold. Mathematical. Waiting for Garrett to make one more mistake. Garrett looked at Adam. Then at the timer. 10 seconds. The Valyrian released a long, defeated breath. He stayed on one knee. He didn't stand. He couldn't. There was nothing left in the tank. The terrestrial hadn't overpowered him. The terrestrial had simply let him defeat himself. The buzzer sounded. Sharp. Loud. Time. Clifford's voice carried something nobody had heard from him before. Awe. Adam exhaled. The tension drained from his body. And the pain came rushing back. He stumbled backward, catching himself against the boundary ropes. His hands gripped the top cable just to stay upright. Across the room, the cadets sat frozen. They looked at the 800-pound bruiser gasping on the floor. Then at the 140-pound communications technician leaning against the ropes. Nobody laughed. Nobody made a cynical comment. Nobody looked away. The paradigm had shifted. Major Shaw finally looked up from her data pad. She studied the ring for several long seconds. Then she looked at Garrett's broken nose. Then at Adam, who was wiping blood from his eyes with a shaking hand. Slowly, deliberately, Shaw tapped the screen of her data pad. Locked it. And stood. She didn't smile. She didn't applaud. She didn't congratulate him. She simply gave Adam one subtle nod. A quiet acknowledgement. Predator to predator. Then she turned and walked through the heavy bulkhead doors. Leaving the gym exactly as she preferred it. Quiet. Disciplined. And painfully aware of what a human being could do. That's the beauty of humanity in the wider galaxy. We may not have the densest bones. We may not have the hardest armor. We may not be the strongest species in the room. But give us enough time. And we'll find the weakness. We'll outthink you. We'll outlast you. And when you finally realize what we're doing, it'll already be too late. That's humanity. Not the strongest. Not the toughest. Just the species that refuses to quit. If this story of asymmetric warfare, human ingenuity, and pure HFY grit hit the mark, hit that like button and subscribe for more cinematic sci-fi stories. And tell me in the comments, what's the most dangerous human survival trait? Adaptability? Endurance? Or the refusal to know when we're supposed to lose? Drop your answer below, and share this story with someone who loves a good HFY tale.